Somewhere on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, there's a cell phone sitting inside a family's home. Investigators want it. The FBI could end up involved. And more than a month after a young man's body turned up on a nearby island, nobody outside that family has been allowed to open it up and look. His name was Nolan Wells, 18 years old. He vanished during a 4th of July celebration out on Horn Island, a barrier island off the Mississippi coast, and 2 days later, his body washed ashore. That much everyone agrees on. Everything else about this case is a mystery that's only gotten murkier by the week. If you're new here, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe. We cover true crime documentaries and unsolved investigations like this one regularly. Now, back to the case. Here's why that phone matters so much. According to digital forensics experts, a device like Nolan's can hold the answers to almost everything investigators need to know. His location before he disappeared, who he was messaging, what he was doing in his final hours.
How much do you think is going to come down to the phone in terms of finding out what really happened?
I think it's really important in cases like this that the phone is a critical piece of evidence. These are teenagers on a boat. If they're teenagers on a boat like teenagers here in North Carolina are, there are probably a bunch of iPhones sitting on that boat. There are databases in that iPhone that can keep track of the last 30 days of usage. Now, given that we're beyond 30 days, it's all going to come down to have these devices been properly preserved by law enforcement or by anyone involved in a potential litigation or lawsuit. So what can we think about on Nolan's phone? We could see all of these pieces of messages potentially being deleted, applications being launched, his Snapchat being opened. I think that was one of the pieces I recall hearing in the news of what other applications, what was going on with this phone, what had been deleted or removed. But we could have retraced all of those steps. So we would hope that counsel for the family and for the decedent has actually preserved that device. They haven't left it powered on in a desk drawer, but they've turned it off or gotten into a digital forensics person to actually preserve it. So that we can go back and try to go through to see what has happened with this phone. Who were they talking to since he went in the water? Like what has physically happened to it? What applications were opened? What communications were sent? What was potentially deleted? The more time that goes on, the less likely these items can be recovered.
And here's the detail that changes everything. Even deleted messages, deleted Snapchats, deleted anything, can often be recovered through forensic analysis. That information doesn't just disappear, it hides in the device, waiting to be found. So here's the question nobody can answer yet. Why, more than a month later, has that phone still not been examined? There's another detail that's been quietly bothering people close to this case. When Nolan's mother got hold of his phone the night he went missing, she checked his Snapchat for that day. According to what she's said publicly, there was nothing there. No activity, no messages, just an empty gap on the one day that mattered most. To a mother looking for any trace of her son's final hours, that silence felt wrong.
Yeah, and the family has said that they are going to do a joint inspection, that investigators are going to do an inspection of the phone, and that they have independent experts who are going to do an inspection. And they've suggested that the phone was tampered with, although we don't really know exactly what that means. And also they've demanded digital records from 5 tech platforms I saw. I was looking through the court records: Meta, TikTok, Snap, which would be Snapchat, WhatsApp, and Life 360. Can they see everything through if they get those records? Like if someone deleted something, like let's say someone else got a hold of the phone and started deleting messages, would they still be able to see those messages?
It all depends on what's synced back to the cloud. So if Nolan's phone continued to have a cellular signal or were connected to somebody's Wi-Fi and that data did sync up to the cloud, we start running into a data destruction period. In a recent case, we did find out that Google maintains data for about 48 hours after and the actual deletion occurs. So if law enforcement or investigator is not very quick to issue a preservation request to Google following an incident, that data could be lost forever, and then the phone becomes that much more crucial, and that we hope it has been powered down and placed into evidence.
What about with Apple? Do we know how long? Like, I guess I'm thinking about like text messages or Apple messages and you do in your iPhone. If you went through and deleted messages, can those still be found?
They can be found, but again, we have to preserve that device. The more we continue sending it, using it to send messages, to be powered on and in use, there are areas that can be recovered that can potentially contain those deleted messages. So until the phone is continued to be used, what we call a journaling file or write-ahead log within the messaging database, that can still be there and it can still be forensically recovered. Now, if we go back a year from now, it is much less likely to still be recoverable. But there are other pieces like notification histories, so that we may be able to see a message was incoming or being sent. So it'd be really important to look not only within the messaging databases, but within all of the other activities of the device.
What do you know about with Snapchat? Because I guess that, their whole thing is that it's a snap and then it goes away. If there were snaps that may tell more of the story of what happened here, could those be found?
Physically on the device, yes. We have had success in the past, and over the years, from my time in law enforcement to now working in the private sector, we've gone through time and periods of Snapchat having that data, Snapchat not having that data, the phone having it, the phone not having it. So there's no way to tell definitively, but that initial preservation of the device has to occur, and that gives us the best opportunity to try to recover data.
And you mentioned you used to be in law enforcement, you're now in the private sector, and the family has said they're going to do their own private analysis of the phone, which is essentially kind of the work that you guys do. How does that work when it's not law enforcement? Do they just give a company the phone and say, hey, what can you find on this, basically?
That's right. That's for many of private clients, whether it's retained in a civil case or an insurance case, we go through and we perform the same level of extraction law enforcement does. We perform what's called a full file system extraction of the device. And really what that does is it puts all the data on ice so that if we can just preserve it for now and come back to it 6 months from now, we can. And then that way, if the phone goes missing or destroyed or burned in a fire or whatever, we have that evidence that we can go back to always. So we can go back, begin going through timeline application activity, establishing who was in contact with whom, was anything potentially deleted during certain time periods. So that full file system extraction, that is what I would hope from a joint inspection between law enforcement, government investigators, and a private investigator preserve on Nolan's phone.
The family and investigators actually agreed, back on July 15th, to examine that phone together. Their own experts, the state's experts, possibly the FBI, all in the same room. That agreement is now over a month old. It still hasn't happened, but that's about to change. There's a new deadline now on the table. There's a grand jury quietly building a case behind closed doors. There's an official autopsy sitting sealed in a file somewhere, results nobody outside that investigation has seen. And there's a major civil rights organization that just stepped into this case. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand exactly how one untouched cell phone turned into the center of one of the most disputed death cases in the country. So let's break down how this standoff over the phone has actually played out. According to reports, investigators demanded the Wells family hand over the phone earlier this month. The family says they were simply out of town when that request came in. But the real holdup goes back even further, to that joint examination agreement from July 15th. Weeks passed, nothing happened. Then, just this past week, the family's attorney, nationally known civil rights lawyer Ben Crump, sent a letter to the Jackson County District Attorney's Office. In it, Crump said the family remains eager to move forward with the joint forensic examination both sides agreed to back in July, and that their experts have been on standby the entire time. He offered the DA 4 possible days to choose from, all within a single week, sometime between August 18th and the 21st, and requested the exam take place at a community college's digital forensics lab on the Gulf Coast, with both sides present in the room together. So what could investigators actually find if this examination finally happens? According to people who specialize in digital forensic analysis, it comes down to one major factor: how well that phone has been preserved since the day Nolan vanished. Most modern iPhones keep a rolling log of device activity for about 30 days. Call records, app usage, location history. Problem is, we're already past that window, which means whether critical evidence still exists may have already been decided, weeks ago, by whoever's had physical control of that phone. If the device has simply been powered off this whole time, there's still a real chance investigators could recover deleted material, text messages, opened and closed apps, even Snapchats sent or received in Nolan's final hours. That's part of why Nolan's legal team has also gone after digital records from 5 major platforms: Meta, TikTok, Snapchat, WhatsApp, and the location tracking app Life 360. But timing matters here too. Google, for example, reportedly holds deleted account data for only about 48 hours before it's gone permanently. If investigators didn't move fast enough to request preservation in the days right after Nolan disappeared, some of that digital trail may already be unrecoverable, at least through the cloud. iPhones work a little differently. Deleted text messages can sometimes still be pulled from what's called a write-ahead log, a temporary record the messaging system keeps before fully clearing old data. But the more a phone stays in use, the more that recoverable information gets overwritten for good. And even when a message itself is gone, the notification history built into the operating system can sometimes still prove a message came in or went out, even if nobody can read what it said. Snapchat is the trickiest of all. It's built to disappear. People in digital forensics say recovery success with Snapchat data has been inconsistent for years. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it isn't. And here's the thing, Nolan's phone might not even be the only one that matters. Investigators may eventually need search warrants for the phones belonging to the other teens who were out on that island. But every day that passes makes that harder too. If a friend's phone has stayed in constant use or gotten traded in, whatever data existed on it back on the 4th of July could already be gone. There's also the question of location. If Nolan's phone has genuinely been preserved, analysts say investigators should be able to reconstruct exactly where that device was, down to precise GPS coordinates, practically minute by minute. But that only works if the device hasn't been powered on and carried around in the meantime. Even leaving a phone on in a desk drawer for a few weeks can quietly overwrite the very location history everyone's trying to recover. If examiners do get access, the process itself is fairly standardized. Forensics teams typically perform what's called a full file system extraction, copying every piece of recoverable data off the device and preserving it permanently, so investigators can go back through it months or years later if needed. From there, they start reconstructing a timeline. Who Nolan was in contact with, what was deleted, and exactly when. But there's a difference between what technology can recover and what anyone's actually allowed to see. And that's where this case gets even more complicated. Before we get further into the standoff over that phone, there's another mystery worth addressing, one a lot of viewers have asked about. If Nolan went into the water on the 4th of July, why did it take 2 full days for his body to be found? According to people who specialize in water search and recovery, that timeline isn't actually unusual. Bodies don't resurface immediately after someone goes into open water. Decomposition has to reach a certain point before gases build up enough to bring a body back to the surface. Water temperature, current, what a person was wearing, even their body composition, all of it affects how long that process takes. In similar cases, investigators say a body surfacing more than 24 hours later, sometimes well past 48, is consistent with what typically happens, not a sign that something was staged or covered up. That doesn't answer the bigger question, though. What actually happened to Nolan before he went into the water? And that's exactly what makes the phone so important, and exactly why it's strange that law enforcement hasn't pushed harder to get their hands on it. Here's a theory that's been floating around from people close to the investigation. Law enforcement may be intentionally holding back because of the grand jury. A grand jury is now involved in the Nolan Wells case, and once that happens, a lot of the normal rules around an investigation change completely. A grand jury isn't a criminal trial jury, exactly, but it's built from the same basic idea. Everyday people pulled from the community, with no more special standing than anyone else. A mail carrier, a nurse, a retired teacher. People get a notice in the mail. They show up, and for the length of that grand jury's term, they take on real legal power. They can subpoena documents. They can subpoena physical evidence, like a cell phone. They can call in witnesses, investigators, even law enforcement officers, and ask them anything they need to know. And once someone walks out of that grand jury room, they're bound to secrecy. They can't talk about what was said, what was shown, or who testified. That's by design. Grand jury secrecy exists to protect the people involved, witnesses, anyone under scrutiny, even law enforcement, and to make sure that if the grand jury does recommend charges, the person facing them doesn't get a head start to disappear before it happens. That secrecy is also exactly why Nolan's official autopsy results are still sealed. Once a grand jury is seated, Evidence like an autopsy report typically gets folded into their review and doesn't become public until the grand jury finishes its work or a case is formally charged. So, even though the state completed its official autopsy of Nolan weeks ago, nobody outside that investigation, not the family, not the public, not the people making documentaries about this case, has been allowed to see what it says. Some legal observers believe this secrecy might explain the delay with the phone, too. If investigators believe the grand jury has the authority to subpoena that device directly, they may be intentionally staying out of the way rather than risking a conflict over jurisdiction. Whether that's actually the right call is something legal experts themselves seem divided on. What we do know is that a grand jury typically doesn't work one case at a time. Depending on the state, the same group of citizens may be reviewing several unrelated cases during their term. For Nolan's case specifically, that means investigators and both sides' attorneys are likely still building out exactly what gets presented, part of why this has dragged on as long as it has. To some people following this case, all that secrecy looks less like a legal process and more like something being hidden. Legal experts generally push back on that read. A closed-door grand jury isn't unique to this case. It's how the system is designed to work everywhere in the country. The trade-off is that a process built to be fair to everyone involved is by necessity one the public can't watch happen in real time. While the standoff over the phone has dragged on, this case has kept expanding well beyond just the family and investigators. The NAACP has now stepped into the Nolan Wells case directly, bringing on their own attorney and opening what they're describing as their own investigation into what happened. The public attention around this case has also become its own kind of story. According to reports, one of the teenagers who was out on the island that night is the child of a judge, a detail that's only added more scrutiny and speculation to an already tense situation. Some of the other teenagers involved have reportedly received death threats online from strangers with no real connection to the case who've decided to act as judge and jury on their own. People close to the investigation say that kind of pressure doesn't get anyone closer to the truth. It just adds more pain for families on every side of this. There's one more detail worth sitting with, something that stuck with people following this case closely. On the night everyone realized Nolan was missing, someone called his mother to ask if she'd seen him, apparently assuming Nolan was with her. He wasn't.
One of the first things I told Miss Christine Wells in the first phone call that ever occurred with anything to do with Nolan Wells being gone, because I was the first person to call Miss Christine about anything.
As far as she understood it, he was still out with the group he'd left with in the first place. That small, confusing exchange, right in the hours when it mattered most, is exactly the kind of detail investigators would want to pin down, and exactly the kind of thing a phone's message history might be able to answer, if anyone's ever allowed to actually look. Which brings this whole case back to where it's been stuck for over a month. Two pieces of evidence sit at the center of the mystery surrounding Nolan Wells' death. One is an official autopsy report, completed by the state weeks ago, currently sealed until the grand jury finishes its work. The other is a cell phone, sitting untouched, that digital forensics experts say could hold some of the clearest answers about Nolan's final hours, if it hasn't already lost that information to time. There's now a real deadline on the calendar. Attorney Ben Crump has given prosecutors a 4-day window, August 18th through the 21st, to finally sit down with the family and conduct the joint forensic examination both sides agreed to more than a month ago. Whether that actually happens, and what investigators find if it does, is still completely unknown. What happened to Nolan Wells is, honestly, still a mystery. Every theory right now is still just that, a theory. The evidence that could turn theories into answers is sitting in a case file and inside a phone, both just out of reach. This is an active investigation, and as the case moves forward, we'll keep following it and bringing you the developments as they happen.